There is a detail that most people miss when they hear this story, and it is this. The watch was not worth $10 when Raymond Calloway first held it in his hands. It was sitting in a cardboard box at the back of Hargrove Estate Sales on a Tuesday morning in late October, in a town called Bracebridge, Ontario, where the maples had already gone red and the air carried that particular chill that comes off Georgian Bay and settles into your bones before you even realize it has arrived. The box had a piece of masking tape on the side with the words MISC JUNK written in black marker. That was the category they had assigned it to. Miscellaneous junk. Raymond was not supposed to be there at all. He had come in to look at a set of hand tools from a deceased estate. A craftsman's collection, the kind that does not get made anymore, with the weight in the right places and the steel tempered properly. He was a mechanic by trade, or rather he had been called that so long that the word had lost whatever small amount of accuracy it once carried. He could rebuild a transmission from memory. He had once re-engineered a vintage tractor engine on a farm outside of Huntsville using parts sourced from 3 different decades and a piece of mild steel he cut himself. The men he worked with called him capable. The men who hired him and paid him called him an employee. He was 41 years old. His daughter Sophie, 6, her mother Claire, had died of an aggressive form of ovarian cancer 22 months earlier, and Raymond had not slept more than 5 consecutive hours since the night she passed. Not from grief alone, though that was there too, sitting in the chest the way a stone sits at the bottom of a clear lake, visible, permanent, cold. He did not sleep because Sophie woke at odd hours and called for him, and because even when she did not call, he lay awake listening for her. He found the tools he had come for. They were good. He paid what was asked and carried them to the truck, and then for a reason he could not have explained clearly, even to himself, he went back inside. That was when he saw the box. He almost did not look into it. A man learns, after enough years of handling other people's cast-offs, that most things labeled junk are in fact junk. But something made him pause beside the folding table where the box sat, and he reached in and moved aside a tangle of copper wire and a cracked picture frame and a door hinge that had lost its screws, and his hand closed around the watch. It was a Patek Philippe, or at least it had the shape of one. The case was yellow gold, heavily tarnished, and the crystal face was scratched to near opulence. The crown was stuck. The strap was long gone, replaced at some point with a strip of brown leather that had dried and cracked and now curled at both ends like a piece of old bark. There was no movement at all when he held it to his ear. The tag tied to it with a loop of white thread said $10. Raymond Calloway was not a watch collector. He knew almost nothing about horology beyond the fact that his grandfather had owned one good watch and worn it every day of his working life and been buried with it on his wrist because that was what the man had wanted. But Raymond knew quality the way certain people know it without being able to articulate it, in the hands, in the weight, in the particular way a well-made thing resists its own deterioration. This watch had resisted, badly outmatched by time and neglect, but resisting still. He paid the $10. The woman behind the table, young, bored, processing transactions without looking up, put the watch in a small paper bag and handed it across without comment. He sat in the truck for a moment with the paper bag on the passenger seat. Then he drove home, picked Sophie up from her after-school program, made her dinner, read her 2 chapters of the book she had chosen, turned off the light, and sat in the kitchen with the watch on the table in front of him for a long time before he went to look for his magnifying glass. The following morning, Raymond drove to the shop where he worked, a small independent garage on Ecclestone Drive that handled mostly domestic vehicles and the occasional boat engine, and he set the watch on the clean corner of his workbench and continued looking at it in the moments between jobs. He was not thinking about money. He did not have the frame of reference for that yet. He was thinking about the case, the way it was constructed. The way the joints met at the lugs. He had worked on enough machinery to know that there is a difference between something that is made carefully and something that is made to appear carefully made, and this was the former. Whatever else had happened to this watch, it had been built by someone who understood that every part was accountable to every other part, that nothing could be careless because carelessness migrated. That afternoon, on his lunch break, Raymond searched the reference numbers he had found stamped on the case back. He read what came up 3 times to be sure he was reading it correctly. Then he read it a 4th time. The reference number corresponded to a Patek Philippe Ref. 1518 in yellow gold, a perpetual calendar chronograph, first produced in 1941, discontinued in 1954. Total production across the entire run had been approximately 281 pieces. The last publicly recorded auction sale of a yellow gold example had taken place 6 years prior. The number at the end of that sentence was not a number Raymond had ever associated with an object he could hold in one hand. It was $4,200,000. He put the phone face down on the workbench and stood very still for a moment. Then he picked it up again and looked at the number again. He did not tell anyone, not that afternoon and not that evening. He put Sophie to bed and then sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down, slowly and carefully, everything he had found and everything he needed to verify before he allowed himself to believe any of it. The crystal needed to come off, the movement needed to be seen, the case hallmarks needed to be examined by someone who knew what they were looking at. Reference numbers could be stamped onto the wrong cases, dials could be swapped. The watch world, he had already learned in the space of an afternoon of reading, was dense with fakes, composites, and honest mistakes that became expensive misrepresentations. He needed to be certain. The nearest qualified watchmaker of any serious standing was in Barry, a man named Desmond who operated out of a second-floor workshop above a jewelry store on Dunlop Street, and who came recommended by 3 separate online forums dedicated to vintage timepieces. Raymond called the next morning and made an appointment for the following week. In the meantime, he kept working. He also kept looking. He went back to the Bracebridge estate sale records, the ones that were publicly accessible, and traced the source of the box. It had come from the property of a man named Edward Sutcliffe, who had died in August at the age of 89. The property had been a large house on the lake. The estate had been handled by the deceased's nephew, who lived in Calgary, and had flown in for the weekend to authorize the sale of the household contents before returning home. The nephew's name was Bryce Sutcliffe, and he had contracted the liquidation to Hargrove Estate Sales with instructions to clear everything that was not specifically listed in the will. The watch had not been listed in the will. Raymond found a digitized archive of a local newspaper from 1987 that contained a society photograph from a charity auction at the Muskoka Boat and Heritage Center. In the photograph, a man in his early 50s stood beside a woman in a blue dress, and on his left wrist, partly visible below the cuff of his dinner jacket, was a watch with a case shape that Raymond now recognized. The man in the photograph was identified in the caption as Edward Sutcliffe. Raymond printed the photograph and put it in a folder with his notes. He did not sleep well the week before the Barry appointment, but that was not unusual. He had not slept well in 22 months. Desmond was a small, deliberate man who wore a magnifying loupe on a headband and spoke in the measured way of someone who had learned, over decades, the cost of imprecise language. He took the watch from Raymond without expression, carried it to his bench, and began to examine it under a strong lamp. He did not speak for a long time. Raymond sat in the chair provided for clients and waited. "Where did you get this?" Desmond said finally. It was not quite a question. "Estate sale," Raymond said. "Box of miscellaneous items." Desmond was quiet again for another interval. "The movement is original," he said. "The case is original. The dial is correct for the reference and the period. There is a jeweler's mark on the inside of the caseback that I would want to research further, but provisionally." He paused. He set down one tool and picked up another. "Provisionally, I have no reason to believe this is anything other than what the reference number indicates it is." Raymond said nothing. "You understand what that means," Desmond said. I think so, Raymond said. You should have it formally authenticated, Desmond said. Patek Philippe's own archive service in Geneva or a major auction house with vintage watch expertise. Epli, Phillips, Christie's. This is not something you want to proceed on without formal documentation. He looked up from the bench for the first time since he had started examining the watch. How much did you pay for it? $10, Raymond said. Desmond looked at him for a long moment. I'll give you the number for the Phillips contact in Geneva, he said. The authentication process took 11 weeks. Raymond shipped the watch, insured for a provisional estimate that still felt surreal when he wrote the number on the forms, and waited. He received emails at intervals that were formal and professional and gave away nothing about the outcome. He continued going to work. He continued picking Sophie up from school and making her dinner and reading to her at night. He did not tell his parents. He did not tell his colleague Terence, who worked the next bay over and was the closest thing Raymond had to a friend at the shop. He did not tell anyone because there was nothing to tell yet, and because he had learned, in the years since Claire died, that speaking about uncertain things too soon had a way of spending the hope before it arrived. Sophie turned 7 in November. He baked her a lemon cake because that was what she had asked for, and she wore the paper crown he made her out of a cereal box, and she did not ask why he kept looking at his phone. She did ask. One evening in early December, why he seemed distracted. He told her he was thinking about work. She accepted this with the particular gravity of a child who has already learned that some of the things adults say are approximate rather than precise. Okay, she said. But you seem like you're thinking about something big. He looked at her across the kitchen table. I might be, he said. She nodded. She went back to drawing in her notebook. The authentication came back on a Thursday morning in January, on a day when the temperature in Bracebridge had dropped to -22, and the truck had required 15 minutes of idle time before Raymond trusted it on the road. He read the email in the driveway, still in his winter coat, the engine running. The watch was genuine, a Patek Philippe Ref 1518 in yellow gold, produced in 1944, with documented provenance connecting it to a private Geneva collection before disappearing from records in the early 1970s. The authentication letter was 12 pages. The estimated auction value, based on current market conditions and the completeness of the case, dial, and movement, was listed as a range. The low end of the range was $3.8 million. The high end was $5.2 million. Raymond read that paragraph 4 times. Then he sat in the driveway for another few minutes with the engine running and the heat coming through the vents and the authentication email on his phone. And he thought about the box with the masking tape label that said MISC JUNK. And he thought about Claire, who had died, believing they would never have enough money to stop worrying about money. And he thought about Sophie eating lemon cake in a paper crown, and he did not cry because the temperature outside was -22, and he was still wearing his work coat and he had to be at the shop by 8. But it was a near thing. He consigned the watch through Phillips' auction house. His contact there was a woman named Caroline, based in the Hong Kong office, who communicated with the efficiency and precision that Raymond had come to associate with people who work with extremely valuable things and understand that sentiment and commerce are separate categories that must be kept carefully apart. She walked him through the process. She did not express surprise at his circumstances. She did not ask, more than once, how he had come to possess the watch. The auction was scheduled for May. In the months between January and May, Raymond did the following. He continued going to work because he did not see the point in making decisions based on money that did not yet exist. He took Sophie to her swimming lessons on Saturday mornings. He had his parents over for dinner twice and was, for the first time in a long while, genuinely present at the table rather than sitting inside his own exhaustion. He slept, if not well, then adequately, which was an improvement. He did not tell people at work. He did not want the period between the decision and the outcome to exist in the knowledge of others, because he had learned the particular weight of other people's anticipation. He did tell Sophie in March, sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon. He explained it to her as clearly as he could, using language that a 7-year-old could hold. "The watch I found," he said, "might be worth a lot of money. We won't know until it sells, but it might mean that things get easier." Sophie thought about this. "How much easier?" she said. "A lot easier," Raymond said. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, would we still live here?" "For a while," Raymond said. "And then we'd find somewhere good." She seemed to consider the adequacy of this. "Okay," she said. "Can I still finish the school year here?" "Yes," Raymond said. "Okay," she said again, and went back to her drawing. The auction took place on a Thursday evening in May. Raymond watched it live on the Phillips website, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he did not drink, Sophie asleep upstairs. The lot was number 37. He watched 36 lots sell. He watched the hammer come down on watches and clocks and objects he could not identify. He watched the bid counters move and the numbers climb and the lots close. When lot 37 came up on the screen, he stood. The bidding opened at $3.2 million. It moved quickly in the first 90 seconds. 2 telephone bidders and 1 bidder in the room, according to the text updates. Then 1 telephone bidder dropped. The remaining 2 continued. The number on the screen moved past 4 million, past 4.5. The room bidder dropped at 4.8. The telephone bidder held. The hammer came down at $5,400,000. Raymond stood at the kitchen table in Bracebridge, Ontario, at 11:47 at night, and the number on his screen was $5.4 million. And he put both hands flat on the table and leaned on them for a moment, because his legs had gone uncertain beneath him. After the auction house fees and applicable taxes, and the legal work that followed, Raymond Calloway received a wire transfer that settled at $3,942,000. He read the bank notification on his phone on a Tuesday morning, parked outside Sophie's school after dropping her off. He sat in the truck for a while. Then he called Terence at the shop and said he would not be in today, and Terence asked if everything was all right, and Raymond said, yes, everything was fine. He just had some things to attend to. He could hear in his own voice that something was different, but Terence did not push, because Terence was the kind of person who understood that some things would be explained in time. Raymond drove to the cemetery where Claire was buried. It was not a thing he did regularly. He had found, in the 2 years since her death, that the cemetery offered him less than he had expected, and that what he needed from her was not located in that particular place. But he went that morning and stood for a while beside the stone in the early May sun, with the sound of the highway distant and the smell of cut grass rising from somewhere nearby. He did not speak. There was not much to say that needed to be said out loud. He had not been looking for the watch. He had gone in for tools and come out with something that would allow Sophie to go to a good university without debt, that would allow him to stop calculating whether the truck could make it another winter, that would allow him, perhaps, to work on things he actually wanted to work on, rather than things that paid the bill that was due. He had paid $10 for it. He stood there in the May sun and thought about a cardboard box with a masking tape label on the side, and about a young woman at an estate sale who had processed his transaction without looking up, and about an 89-year-old man who had worn a watch in a photograph in 1987 and not thought to include it in his will, and about all the accumulated contingency that had led from those facts to this moment, to him standing in a cemetery in Bracebridge on a Tuesday morning with an amount of money in his bank account that he could not yet make feel entirely real. He was a mechanic. He was a father. He was a widower. He was, as of last Tuesday, a man with nearly $4 million and a daughter who wanted to finish the school year where she was, and who drew in her notebook at the kitchen table, and who had told him 2 mornings after he explained about the watch that she was glad things were going to get easier, and then asked if he could make lemon cake again sometime, because she had really liked it. He had told her yes. Of course yes. He left the cemetery and drove back through town and picked up groceries and 2 lemons and went home to be there when the school bus came at 3:15. Sophie came down the steps with her backpack and her lunch bag, and she saw him waiting. And she smiled the way she had not entirely stopped smiling, even in the hard months, the way that had sometimes been the only thing standing between Raymond and the particular darkness that comes to a man who has lost the person he was supposed to grow old with. And she crossed the street and took his hand, and they walked inside together. He made lemon cake. She wore the paper crown again, the same one from November, slightly more battered now, one point bent where it had been stored under her bed. It was, Raymond thought, watching her from across the kitchen, more than enough.